Hello, everybody. My name is Ali Imran, and I am the organizer of Reason Fest 2018. Welcome to the final day and the final session of the event. Reason Fest is an event, is an annual event that we organized at Secular Jayhawks to promote science, secularism, and rationality. And as part of the event, we this year tried to focus on bringing out speakers and participants with diverging viewpoints and backgrounds. Part of the effort that we were making this year was to have a positive space, a healthy atmosphere for our participants and speakers to interact and exchange ideas. So we have invited a panel of ex-Muslims. They're from the ex-Muslims of North America. It's an organization primarily composed of ex-Muslims who speak out against atrocities being committed in the Muslim world. And today we are going to be having a panel discussion on the topic, can Islam be apolitical? And we're going to be asking questions, is Islam an inherently religious faith? And we'll try to answer the question, how does religious infusion into politics affect progress in the Muslim world? All right, so I'm going to introduce my panel of speakers here. First off, on the right, we have Sarah Haider. Sarah is an American writer, speaker, and activist. Sarah was born in Pakistan, like myself, and raised in Texas. She co-founded the Ex-Muslims of North America in 2013, and now she serves as the executive director of the organization. Please welcome Sarah Haider. In the middle, we have Armin Navabi. Armin is a former Muslim from Iran and the founder of the Atheist Republic. It's a non-profit organization dedicated to offering a safe community for atheists around the world. He's also the author of the best-selling book, Why There Is No God. Please welcome Armin Navabi. And finally, we have Ghada Ibrahim. Ghada is a Saudi national who grew up in Saudi Arabia. Her family is a fundamentalist Shia Muslim family. Ghada was a practicing Muslim until researching women's role in Islam and reading on theology and jurisprudence. She left Islam in 2011 while studying engineering in the United States. Please welcome Ghada Ibrahim. So the format of this is going to be such that we'll have the speakers talk for about an hour in the beginning, and then we'll have questions and answers after. First off, I will invite our speakers to introduce themselves and their work. So starting with Sarah.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. I'm glad everyone could make it. You know, some of you could make it. The weather's pretty terrible. But yeah, my name is Sarah Haider. I have been an atheist since I was about 16 or so. I was born in Pakistan, but I was raised in the United States. So my experience with Islam and the Muslim community is largely through the Muslim community in the West. For the last 5 years or so, I've been working with ex-Muslims in North America. Today, I'm the executive director. We work to advocate on behalf of ex-Muslims. We work to mitigate the cost of apostasy from Islam, and we do this in a variety of ways. So one of the ways that we do this is by building communities of ex-Muslims all across the United States and Canada. And these are covert, secret groups, accessible only to the people that have joined the communities. We have about 20 or so far, which are active, again, across the continent. And those are kind of the backbone of the organization. In addition, we also produce videos. We have a series called the Life Beyond Faith series. And if you haven't seen it, I would urge you to look it up on YouTube, on the Ex-Muslims of North America's YouTube channel. I'm really proud of that work. And the idea behind those was to just have these short portraits of ex-Muslims. There's a lot of stereotypes of who we are, what motivates us to speak out, and why we choose to be outspoken about it. And the idea of the videos was just to show that there's a diversity of people who call themselves ex-Muslims, that have a diversity of backgrounds and perspectives on relationships with the religion and their family and friends. So actually, one of the people that was featured, the subject of the video, Ghada, is here, and I really urge you to look that up. I thought that was a wonderful video, and it's just fascinating to hear her story, and you'll hear a little bit more of it. I did want to also, in addition to introducing myself and the organization, talk about why we're here today. So this final thing that we've been doing, we've been working with student groups across the United States and Canada for what we call our Normalizing Dissent tour. And the idea is just to help ex-Muslims get out of the shadows so that this dialogue around Islam doesn't center, solely around the extremists, those who apologize for Islam on one end, and those who seek to demonize Muslims as people on the other. And today we're here to discuss secularism and Islam, the extent to which Islam is a political faith inherently, and how that reflects in Muslim countries today. And you may ask why this is relevant. I mean, it's obvious, I think, to everyone that Islam presents a lot of challenges, even to those of us in the West. But dealing with those challenges intelligently requires that we understand exactly what it is that we're dealing with. And to that extent, I think it's important to recognize the ways in which the Muslim world operates a little bit differently than the West. This is especially important, I think, in the discussion around Islamic reform and liberalization. I've noticed that most individuals who are involved in such a project attempt to achieve this liberalization, this modernization, through the religion itself. For example, there's feminists who will attempt to find verses in the Quran to support feminism in order to advocate for feminism. But before we embark on that project, I think it's fair to ask, to what degree is this possible? To what degree is it possible to reform Islam using Islam itself? I will do a little bit of throat clearing before we begin. Of course, we are speaking in generalizations. You can find specific counterexamples to anything we say, but I think it's really important to look at tendencies and see what they can teach us. We also want to be clear, ex-Muslims in North America, and also I think the panelists here, that although we believe that we have a right and even a duty to criticize the faith, that we must also stand for the rights and liberties of Muslims themselves, and that it is morally wrong and you can argue pragmatically counterproductive to focus our criticism on the believers rather than the ideology. I will also, I guess, give a little bit of background on the topic before we start our discussion. Just to give just a vague general idea. In an Islamic state, God is the head of the state, and the caliph is kind of an enactor of God's will. Over time, the role of the caliph historically evolved. Later, the caliph was forced to consult with religious jurists and scholars, but the point being is that the head of state must be subservient to the dictates of religion. I think it's also interesting to note that while the idea of a Christendom is kind of antiquated in the West, the idea of the Ummah, which is to say the community of believers, is very much alive in Islam and is currently undergoing a resurgence in popularity, even among Muslims in the West. Lastly, it's important to know that the idea of the church and the state as one unit has been a part of Islam since its literal foundations. The Prophet Muhammad was a ruler in addition to a religious leader. He was a statesman. The early caliphs cemented that tradition. For example, Abu Bakr, the first caliph, explicitly stated that his rule was legitimate only so far as he followed the rules of Allah. So I think that's a good general introduction, and I guess I'll let the other panelists introduce themselves.
Well, are we moving into...
if you wanted to talk about your own work, yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I think they did a very good job at introducing me already. Just if I had to add anything to it. So, my work with Atheist Republic, something I just want to add something that we recently have been doing is we added Atheist Republic voicemails podcast. So if you're watching this on YouTube or anywhere, if you have anything to share, or if you want to leave a message for atheists all around the world, you can just go atheistrepublic.com and you record your message or your request or your fears or your message of support or whatever you want And basically, the podcast is voicemails after voicemails from atheists from all around the world. There's no hosts. It's just everybody gets to be a host. And it's meant to democratize the process of podcasting and give every atheist around the world a voice. And it's very easy to do. You just click the green button and you record your voice. There's a 5-minute limit, and it will be and it gets reviewed and go on the podcast. And if you don't want to leave a message, just listening to it is amazing. You get so many amazing messages from atheists around the world. With regards to my book, Why There Is No God, if you can't afford to buy a book, or if you don't have a credit card, or you live in a country where there's no Amazon, then message me and I'll send you a free PDF copy. And with regards to secular jihadists, was that in the bio? Yeah, if you're interested in ex-Muslims or Islam, check that podcast out. It's a very good podcast. It's with a lot of ex-Muslim guests and other guests. Myself and Ali Rizvi are the co-hosts. Both of us are ex-Muslims, and we have both Sarah and Ghada here were guests on the podcast. So check that out. If you're interested in anything Islam related, that's a great podcast to check out. And if you like it, leave a review, because the more reviews you leave, the more people iTunes will suggest other people to check it out.
My name is Ghada. The only thing I would like to add to my introduction is that this topic is very important to me because I'm obviously from a Muslim majority country that is not secular. And when living in a country that is not secular, and probably Armin can also tell you because he grew up in Iran, is that it's very, very different from living in a country that separates church from state, where Allah, Islam, the religion, the Ummah, it's everywhere around you, and it dictates your daily life.
All right, thank you for the succinct introductions. I am going to ask our panelists some questions, and after we're done with the questions, you guys will be welcome to ask questions of them. First of all, what do you guys think? To each of you, what is secularism?
Should I?
Yeah.
All right. So secularism means different things to different people, but the common thing among all of them is that it's basically talking about the relationship that government has with religion. But the difference between them is to what degree this relationship is separated. And different countries and different people have different experiences in what they felt secularism meant when it was introduced to them. So when you talk about secularism in Turkey, you get a different response to it than when you talk about it in the United States, and also different. It's also been changing in the past few years, its definition for different people, right? So, but again, the main idea is the separation of religion and politics. But the degree of the separation, if we go from the most friendly towards religion to the least friendly towards religion, I would put it in 4 categories. The first one, the most friendly one, would be religion would be one of the many set of ideas that has a seat on the table, and you get to have policies and rules based on religion. But the reason it's secular is because everybody gets to have their views in policy making. The second degree, and the way I try to imagine it is that like you have a table and religion, you have some adults making decisions, and religion is one of those adults. The second degree is that religion sits at the kids' table, you don't take it seriously, adults make their decision here, they make policies. Religion doesn't get to make policies based on religious ideas. They get to practice their religion publicly and privately, but not, there's no way that you could have any laws or make any courts based on religion. And then the next one is that they get to practice it privately, but not publicly, and obviously no laws or policies. And the last one is that not only they don't get to have any laws or policies based on religion, practicing religion is also illegal, and that's the most extreme version of it. And I think the ones that number 2 and number 3 are the ones that we mean when we talk. We do think that secularism, the one that we advocate for, is that religion has no role in government, but they're free to practice religion. But if you want to add, do you guys agree with that? Okay, so. So secularism does leave room for religion to practice, but given that, and religion that doesn't mean that if you're religious, you don't get to be in politics, and if your intention and motivation for introducing a policy is religious, that's fine as long as you can find a non-religious argument for why other people should take this seriously and adopt it. So your intention could be religious, but secularism acts like a filter here. And if you suggest and make a proposal based on religious grounds, then it doesn't pass the filter. But you could make the same proposal and use non-religious arguments, and then based on because the idea is that you have to prove the policies work for making our lives better based on what is demonstrable, not based on things that you believe, based on other worlds, based on gods and fairy tales. So, by all these definitions of secularism, I think secularism is against Islam, because by Islam's definition, the very nature of Islam wants to have a seat at this table. And if you push Islam to a corner, to a kiss table, and you be like, no, we can't take you seriously. You could do whatever you want over there. You could go draw paintings with cranes and stuff, but you can't sit at the adults' table. That goes against what Islam wants. I mean, if Islam has anything to do with the Quran and Hadith, as long as it's tied to those ideas, it wants more than that. It wants to be making law. Islam is a political religion, and secularism doesn't allow it to be political. So secularism is anti-Islamic. But many times when it's forced to be out of politics, it sometimes acts as if, well, that was where I wanted to be anyways. Like if you throw the kid and tell the kid to go sit at the kids table, it might be upset. You're like, well, I didn't want to sit at the adult table. This is where I want to be. But as soon as you give it an opportunity to come back, it will come back. There's never an example of Islam being in power and all of a sudden looking at their book and deciding maybe we shouldn't be in power, and then not being in politics anymore. It always claimed to not being political only after it was forced out of politics. Do you want to add anything?
Well, I think I could just clarify one bit of it, which is that I think I agreed with what you said about secularism as a whole, but I think what defines a secular ideology is one that is based on the idea that humans can articulate their own values and goals, that, humans can manage their own affairs and figure out discover the best ways of achieving them. You can say that, Marxism is a secularist ideology from that perspective, or liberalism or conservatism. But Islam as a religion, and you can say all religions really, cannot be from that sense secular, because they do not believe that inherently humans have the wisdom or the knowledge to be able to manage their own affairs, which is why scriptures exist in the first place.
Well, that's true. That's true with almost every religion that claims to have access to an all-knowing authority. It doesn't make any logical sense if we go back to the table and every different value system is bringing on the proposal, if one of those value systems believes that they have access to an all-knowing entity and you know its opinion, it doesn't make any sense for you to accept anyone else's opinion. Why would everyone's opinions be taken seriously as equal wait, if what I have, everybody is putting out their opinions, but I'm not putting out my opinion. I'm putting out the word of God. So, it makes complete logical sense for me not to want secularism. The only time that go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to build on that actually, is that the way I look at it with secularism is, of course, the separation from religion, from the state, and from the laws. And just to build on both what Sarah and Armin says, with humans, they have the capability of coming up with laws and regulations to rule themselves, and it evolves over time. Whereas, religious law is kind of ingrained in stone, where you have the Ten Commandments, you can't really change them. You have all of these rules and regulations that each religion has for their people, and there's not really a lot of deviation that you can take. Whereas, in secular law, as we progress, as more scientific evidence comes into play, the laws can change alongside with that. And one of the examples that I can bring out, like for example, like religion is against same-sex marriage. And for the longest time, many countries around the world were also against same-sex marriage and also made homosexuality illegal. As time goes by and as we start to learn more about sexuality and gender and sex, then it becomes more apparent that this is natural, that this is okay, that there's nothing wrong with it, it's not a mental illness. And just a few years ago in the United States, same-sex marriage became legal. Whereas if it was still for example, in a secular country, whether it's a theocracy or not, then that argument that this is against God or Allah or the Bible can always be used to be against for same-sex marriage, for example.
Right. And this is even more true. I mean, we're saying this about all religions, but it's more true when it comes to both Islam and Judaism, because both Islam and Judaism, one thing that they share is within their core is that this is not an ideology that comes and tells you that worship God, love God, be nice to each other. No, it comes with a set of laws. It's that God comes with its rules that people need to abide by, right? And it's not just a way of life. And Islam, even more than Judaism and all of that, it's not just about politics or your spiritual life. Islam is about every single aspect of your life. It takes over everything, and that's what it's trying to do. And this is something they brag about, that it's the most complete religion. And if it's supposed to take over every single thing in your life, politics is not an exception.
Yeah, and that's not an exaggeration. That's what I was taught growing up, that this is like the manual. The Quran is the manual for life.
There is an actual there's an actual verse in the Quran that says exactly that. Yeah. That everything in his say verily, my prayer, my sacrifice, my life, and my death are for Allah, the Lord of all worlds. He has no partner. This is how I have been commanded, and I am the first of those who submit. And this is in Surah Al-An'am 162 to 163. This was also an argument that some Muslim scholars use to say that Islam can't be secular. We have to have Islam as the state religion.
Right. And there are many other verses that says that all legislation are for Allah. Specifically says all legislation. And el hukmu illa lillah. Is that right? she speaks. But there are other, and actually, when I say it makes logical sense for if the premises of Islam is true, it makes logical sense for you not to go for secularism. In fact, the Quran makes that exact argument. It reminds us that Allah is the most knowing, and this knowledge is of both unseen and the seen, and of this world and the next world. And then right after that, it tells you that He shares no partners in legislation. So there's no room for other legislation. But people use these verses to come up with examples for why Islam is not secular, but the Muslims that want to argue why Islam is secular, they point to parts of the Quran that talks about the concept of shura, and basically it's shura in the Quran is a suggestion that you should get together at mutual consultation to come up with to come up with some ideas and policies, but that actually backfires on them because, first of all, the shuras are supposed to be Muslims getting together, not Muslims and Christians and Hindus and Jews. So it actually is very anti-secular. And also these Muslims getting together and deciding what to do with things is mostly about things that God hasn't already told you what to do. And that's when you can get together and decide as a Muslim community. There is nothing actually in the Quran that suggests that anything should be taken before the word of God as law.
To just put a bow on this question, going back to what Armin was saying with defining the differences in secularism, it may seem like it's too specific and it's maybe not that relevant. But while in this discussion we're going to be discussing secularism from the perspective of just a general church and state separation, in practice those particulars of how you're going to practice secularism matter, and we can see that most visibly with the debate on the hijab and the burqa, which covers the face. And you can see this especially most visibly in France, where their conception of laïcité is very different than our conception of church and state separation. And because of this difference, they feel that it is perfectly fine for the state to ban an expression of religious faith under certain contexts, but from an American church and state separation, secularist idea, this seems like oppression. This seems like a state overreaching its bounds. So I think this is something that this discussion of what secularism should be in its particulars too is something that we should be continuing in the West as well.
Thank you for that comprehensive answers. My next question to the panel is Islam inherently against secularism? Are there Islamic arguments for secularism?
I would like to start this answer. There are so many scholars in Islam. Some of them are pretty well known and renowned, like Ali Abdul Rasik, and I think he was in Al-Azhar University in Egypt, which is a high authority of religion in Islam in a lot of the Muslim world, not just in Egypt. But he, unfortunately, was dismissed from his position for what he thought. He wrote a book called Islam and the Principles of Governance. In Arabic, it's called Usul al-Hukm. And in his book, he argued that there is nothing in the Quran or the Sunnah that says that there has to be an Islamic caliphate or that it has to be a state that uses religion as the state religion. And in a way, I kind of tend to agree with some of what he says, that there really isn't a lot in the Quran and the Sunnah that says that you need to, put the Quran and the Sunnah as a legislation, as the constitution for a country. But at the same time, a lot of what we have in Islam today is more or less ijtihad, or what Muslim scholars have come up with on their own as in their studies. And as we go through history after the Prophet's death, we'll start with the Prophet. The Prophet, as Sarah has said, was a statesman. He was not just a man of God. He was also the head of state. And after his death, the Khalifas, even though as we go to the Umayyads and to the Abbasids, they become less and less the head of religion, but they still are more or less enacting God's word.
Right. It doesn't say that you should run a country by Islam, but it does, because there was no countries back then. It's kind of like saying there's nothing in the Quran that tells you that you have to do suicide bombing. Yeah, they didn't have bombs back then, but the country was a modern invention. But it does clearly say everywhere that all laws should be God's law. Whether the fact that it doesn't specify that it needs to be a country is because that's a modern invention. So
this was only one person's idea, because you can still be, and we will discuss this as well as we go through. You can be a Muslim and you can be secular. And he was a Muslim scholar, that was secular, that believed that the rule of the country should go to like the humans and not necessarily be derived from the Quran and the Sunnah.
Right. So Muslims can be secular. Islam can't be secular. Just because Muslims, a lot of times when we say Islam can't be this, can't be that, people point to Muslims. They're like, but this Muslim is secular. This Muslim is supporting gay rights. I'm like, yeah, but Muslims are much more than just Muslims. People always try to reduce Muslims to nothing but Muslims, but everybody is influenced by a lot of competing ideologies, and Muslims in the West and other countries are not just influenced by Islam. In fact, in many Muslims, Islam has a very small impact on their ideology compared to other competing ideology that has an influence on their ideas and beliefs. You want to say something?
Not to that, but maybe to the question as a whole. I mean, just adding back on to what Ghada was saying earlier, is that the example of the Prophet throws a wrench in the works when we're talking about how Muslims should behave, because the Prophet was such an explicitly political person. And it is such a cornerstone of Islam that Muhammad is the perfect man, and his example is the perfect example. It's how we should be living in this world. It's difficult to formulate arguments about staying out of political life, or just ignoring that aspect of society altogether, when the perfect example of man was a very explicitly political person right from the very beginnings, and continued to be that way throughout the end of his life.
And just to answer the question regarding the common arguments, it's really, see, when Muhammad was alive, the answer was very easy for Muslims. Well, Muhammad was both a spiritual leader and a political leader. Once he died, the leaders for the Shias and Sunnis had different roles, with some exceptions. Sunnis, when they saw the Khalifas as political leaders, and this is the Sunnis the Sunnis that argue that Islam could be secular point to the fact that Khalifas were secular. They weren't religious leaders. They weren't like the Pope, and that's an argument for why Islam could be secular. That makes no sense, because you don't have to be a religious leader for you to make sure that your laws are according to Islam. Just because the Khalifas never claimed, so the Khalifas didn't claim to be the source of religious laws, because the ulama, that was the role for the ulama. But the Khalifas made sure that whatever ulamas they had at the time, to either agree, and whatever laws they pass, either sell it as if that's agreeable with Islamic law, or actually make sure that it's agreeable with Islamic law. They weren't religious authorities, but their laws were very much according to Islamic law. And so the Shias were the exact opposite. They saw their imams, except Ali, they saw their imams as not political leaders, but only spiritual leaders. They didn't, other than Ali, none of them actually managed to gain power. And Shias claim that, Shias that want to claim that Shia Islam is secular, and in fact a lot of them now recently are trying to, in reaction to Sunni Muslims, to be like, look, Sunni Islam is the crazy one, Shia Islam is secular and peaceful. And they say, look, in Shia Islam, you're supposed to wait until the 12th Imam Mahdi, comes before you have an Islamic government. And before that, you're not supposed, religion has to be separated from politics. And to that I respond, look at what happened in Iran. This shows for 1400 years, Shia Islam argued that we should wait for Imam Mahdi to claim power. Even in the Safavid Empire, when it started, the founder claimed that he's the Mahdi. Like, you can't be in government unless Imam Zaman comes back. So, but as soon as the Shias won the revolution in Iran, and now they were in a position to take power, this was an inconvenience for them, because the Imam Mahdi was not back, and now they had the government. So guess what? They just made up a new rule, and Khomeini called it Vilayat Faqih, which it's the idea that before Imam Mahdi comes, you have to hold the government for him in his place. Just like that, they just changed 1400 years of theology. But this is the problem with superstition and magic. You could just make shit up, and it's more flexible. Magic is more flexible than facts, right? You can change, facts are not flexible at all. In fact, you can't change facts, but you could change superstition. And when you make laws, even when people are telling you, look, hadith is telling you, hadith and Islam is pro-woman, and it's pro-gay, and you're not supposed to kill ex-Muslims, and you're saying this when you're not in power, well, I don't know if it's going to be the same thing once you're in power, because then you're going to be like, no, oops, we were wrong. Actually, we're supposed to kill you now, sorry.
I'd just like to add one more thing to the argument of why I don't believe that Islam can be secular, is that if you read the Quran, not put the hadith on the side, because you can literally find the hadith for everything you want to look at. But if you look at the Quran itself, there are so many rules and regulations regarding like family law, or what to do with thieves, what to do with people that kill other people. Like these are pretty much the laws that people live by. So if the Quran has these, like this is what you should be doing, this is what you should be enacting in government, then that kind of defeats the purpose of saying that Islam is secular.
Right, and it's very obvious that when you only claim Islam is secular when you're forced into that position, and you only have to look at which Muslims are mostly saying that. You're not seeing Muslims in Qom or in Al-Zahra saying this. You're seeing Muslims in the West saying that because they're already in that position. So they're like, well, this is how it's supposed to be.
Well, I've seen it articulated, like I've seen people say, actually somebody once said to my face, when we were talking about, he was a Muslim, somebody I knew from back home, about the death penalty for apostate to speak out about Islam. He said that, well, he would never ever support such a policy to apostates like that. It's something so barbaric here. In the West, in the United States. And then when I clarified and said, well, how do you feel about Muslims enacting those laws back in their countries? And he said, well, it's their right, and that they're following their scriptures, and I don't want to comment on that. And so that sort of turn of phrase is used whenever convenient. But I do want to push back on the idea that Hadith can say whatever you want it to say. That's not true. It does have tendencies, and it does take a certain form.
There are so many types of hadiths that there's.
You could find.
You can find one to support anything true, but still, on the whole of it, and with taking into account the strength of certain hadiths, it does have a form. Otherwise, Islam would not look any different as a religion.
No, you're right.
Judaism
What I'm saying is that it's not as flexible as people sometimes think. Like it's completely chaotic and you can say anything. There is some internal structure to it. There's some internal consistency to it, but it's way more flexible than facts.
Sure.
You could play around.
It's more flexible than facts.
Yeah, you could play around with it more than if you didn't have magic in your hand. Like you could still play around with it. There's enough verses just to show how flexible it is. There was some reformists were claiming that Islam does not actually condone polygamy, because Islam also teaches you that you have to treat all your four wives completely equally. And because that's absolutely impossible to do, by that logic, Islam is against polygamy. Yeah. And actually a lot of people take this logic seriously. So they think God, instead of saying like, okay, no polygamy, instead of doing that, he said you can have 4 wives, but you have to treat them completely equally. But because that's impossible, that means there shouldn't be no polygamy. Like they can just, and this is not just some random guy. This is people that actually have followers and they just suggest this because maybe in the modern world people don't like that. So guess what? Now they discovered that polygamy apparently is not condoned by Islam. They can just, the hadith is there and they can't just completely ignore it, but there are ways to play around with it and make it mean something completely different.
But only if you already want to. Like only if you're already sold on the liberal way of running the world, then you can, do all these like cartwheels with the text and figure out,
right.
a place that, there was a feminist I forget her name, but she wrote this like feminist Quran, and there's a verse in the Quran where it allows husbands to punish their wives by like beating them, and the word literally means beat, isn't that right? Yeah. So she was like, well, I don't see how this can be feminist, and so she went into some dictionary and looked through like hundreds of definitions of that word till she found one that meant, something ridiculous like
walk towards it.
I don't remember what it was, but I mean, you can do that if you want and find a definition that means tickle, and then say, well, actually what it's telling you to do is to tickle your wives every time they're disobedient, so this is a feminist religion. You can do that if you want, but you already have to be sold on the idea that women deserve equality and you shouldn't beat your wife. So I think that the first step is let's get people to accept the ideas that women should have equality. Let's get people to accept secularism and to accept, minority rights. And how do we get there? Do we get there through the text? No, because you already have to want it to be able to spin it in so many different directions.
And that suggests that when these ridiculous interpretations come from the Hadith and the Quran, and they come with these gymnastic arguments to force it to mean something else, it is these other better values and ideas that forced them to do that. It was nothing within the Islam itself that made them check it again and try to make it mean something else, because they only do it when they have other competing ideas. It's not Islam that is reforming itself. Islam is being pushed aside and is trying to survive, is trying not to die, is trying to adapt and be relevant in this changing world. So it desperately goes and looks at the text and tries to make it mean something else. It's nothing within the book itself that is doing this.
I think we can move on to the next question.
Yep. All right. Well, you guys addressed the theology and the jurisprudence aspect pretty well and its implications on secularism. But what do you think has been the case in actuality? What is the relationship? What has been the relationship between Islam and secularism in the real world? And do you think that there is any support for secularism in the Muslim world today?
Well, I think you can speak in very general terms, and I feel confident in stating that it's, the separation of mosque and state, so to speak, has been, a failure throughout the Muslim world. Most Muslim countries, the constitutions of those countries explicitly declare Islam as a state religion. Most state that the laws of man are subservient to the laws of God. So from that perspective, it hasn't gone so well. If you look at the values and opinions of Muslims themselves, secularism isn't that popular. It depends on the country as to how popular it is, but generally speaking, most Muslims in some countries believe that religion should have an explicit, strong role to play in how the country governs. And even I was looking up to see how this affected Muslims in the West, Muslims who grow up in a secular society. There was a survey. This was done in late 2016, I believe, December, policy exchange survey in Britain, and this was described as the largest study of Muslim opinion in the UK. And it found that 43% of the Muslims polled said that they supported the introduction of Sharia law, and just 22% were opposed. 16% of British Muslims strongly supported the introduction of aspects of Sharia law into Britain. These percentages, they should be shocking, because these are people who are growing up in the West, and these are people who are seeing the fruits of secularism right before their eyes.
And to add to that, I can't speak for the rest of the Muslim world, but I can speak at least for the Arab world and how secularism is viewed, and it's viewed very negatively. So there are a few things that the Muslim Arab world does not like. Does not like the word secularism, does not like the word liberalism, does not like the word feminism. Anything that is related to opening up more freedoms, they're not necessarily very keen on. They look at secularism as something Western, something foreign that is not from within their culture, that it goes against everything that they believe in, that it's more because of how it's so individualistic and gives freedoms to each and every person to do precisely what they believe is to be correct or to be right, and give less legitimacy to the role of God and the scripture. And they don't necessarily like that.
Right. And another example is some experiments some countries did with secularism, which was, instead of being a secular democracy, it was forced secularism. And the experiment that Reza Shah in Iran had with secularism, or Ataturk in Turkey, they completely backfired. So if you want to have secularism and you're an Islamic country, you can't get secular democracy, because if you have democracy, people are not going to vote for secularism, right? There's going to be some influence of religion in politics. So the way you get secularism is you force it on people. And for example, in Iran, you went from a country, the only country that hijab was illegal, to now the only country that hijab is mandatory for everybody, including non-Muslims, in one generation. And the problem with forced secularism is that it backfires. Religion feeds on being the victim, right? And it comes back, and it comes back in a much stronger and more aggressive way. If you look at what happened in both Iran and Turkey now, both of them are more Islamic than they ever been. So if you can't force secularism on people, then the way you introduce secularism in Islamic countries is that you have to first fight Islam. You have to create the environment where secularism is accepted, and this is where ex-Muslim movement is coming. The only way to have secular democracy is to fight Islam. But when you say fight Islam, it's basically reaching out to people, right? It's not. Yeah, you want to say?
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but to add to you is like actually when the case of Turkey, at least in Saudi, is always used as an example, as
right.
a failed way to secularize a country, because look, the people themselves want Islam back into their societies, into their government, and they also look at, they look at Iran in the same way, but not so much, mainly because of the whole Shia-Sunni divide, but right. Turkey for sure.
Yeah, but the revolution in Iran was a big part a reaction to the westernization, and people were like, no, we want to go back to Islam, and now they regret that. But another example is in Egypt, where people give them democracy and they voted for the Muslim Brotherhood, right? So you need to change before you have a top-down approach on policies, you need to have a bottom-up approach and reach out to people, and this is something that is really needed, and I think it's the only solution, and it's not being done. I know it's kind of self-serving to say this, the ex-Muslim movement right now is needed more than ever. It's the civil rights movement of our time, and I don't really see another way to address this other than actually you can't fix this with policies. You have to actually go reach out to people, and people don't like it when I say we need to fight Islam. But then I remind them the only way to fight Islam is to change people's opinions and convince people, and the only way to change people's opinions is to befriend them. So this is much less hostile than it sounds. You have to actually talk to people. And we are doing that with our podcast, with our page, with our websites, with our YouTube channels, and our audience in these countries are growing significantly.
So I'm going to push back just a little bit on the forced secularization point, just to play devil's advocate, not because this is something I agree with. But if you do look at public opinion in Turkey, even if you can argue that it's currently undergoing Islamization. I mean, it's becoming. Armin, I don't know if you wanted to talk about like the history of Turkey and how it got to where it did get to before we move into that.
Well, how far? Like World War I, the Young Turks, and then
just
Ataturk.
Ataturk.
Well, I mean. So actually, it all happened. So the Young Turks were in Turkey. They were like the people that wanted to. They were very open about the fact that they wanted to westernize things. They were materialists. They wanted to reduce the role of religion. And after the First World War, after the Khalifa was removed by Ataturk, this was a huge thing, because this is after. For the first time in Islamic history, there was no caliphs. And this is what ISIS wanted to bring back, by the way. And this guy Ataturk comes in, and Ataturk was a role model to Reza Shah as well. A lot of other leaders around the Middle East looked at them and then, this is what we want. We want to, because they looked at the West, they saw the Islamic world failing, and they looked at the West and were like, we need to reduce the role of Islam. We need to become Western. And they wanted to force what Europe has managed to do in many years. They wanted to do it overnight. So Ataturk went as far as changing the font to Latin fonts, right? Mm-hmm. And so a lot of people that love today, they say like, no, he was fantastic. He made women get education. He made so many universities. He was very pro-science, but also he was very, very anti-religion. I mean, he wouldn't publicly say that, but it was pretty obvious. I mean, Reza Shah was. They were so obsessed with making their countries look Western that Reza Shah actually banned the pictures of camels because he didn't want Iran to be mistaken with Arab countries. And they want to make themselves separate from the barbaric Arabs that they brought their barbaric religion to our country and ruined all Iranian culture. They have this glorified understanding of what Iran used to be before the invasion of Arabs, and they wanted to be like, they think all their problems come from the Arabs. And they didn't want to be associated with that. And I don't know, yeah, go on.
So just to go back to what I was saying, I just wanted you to set up the stage for Turkey at least, because there was an example of forced secularization, forced liberalization, forced modernization, and it worked up until.
No, it works for a short-term period, because instead of going and laying the groundwork for people to come to that conclusion themselves, you just want to make everything look secular overnight by forcing people to act a certain way. If there's not a huge appetite for it, it's just going to work for a little bit, and then you're going to get a reaction to it.
So I don't disagree with that, but again, the devil's advocate argument is that it matters that it was effective for as long as it was, because whatever you can say, the 80 whatever years that there was a liberal Turkey where you can walk around and you can see people in shorts, women in shorts, you can get alcohol and you can drink, and women can have equality in a variety of different ways. That's not irrelevant. It's not meaningful that you have so much time, generations that lived in a secular state, that grew up in that way and weren't persecuted by religion. And if you look at polls of Turkey today, Turks tend to be a little bit more liberal than the rest of the Muslim world. Pakistan, for example, is almost always at just the bottom of the most conservative, the most fundamentalist. Pick the issue, we're there. But Turks comparatively are more liberal. They are more accepting of a variety of different issues, although it seems to be getting worse. And you can also make the argument that just because the secularization we had in the West wasn't forced doesn't mean we aren't in any danger of going right back into some sort of a religious state or a non-secular state. And I think there's a lot of different pulls and pushes there that might force you to go in one way or another. I agree with you, this was just me mostly just playing around with the argument, but I do agree with you that it's more stable if the people agree with those values. But there is lasting change that can happen even with forced secularization. Most Muslim countries, the most liberal Muslim countries, are the ones with a Soviet background. They're the ones that are the most accepting of women who can dress however they want and equality and that kind of thing. And their history reflects that. Their history reflects why their values are the way they are, because at some point they were forced to be not religious, to remove it all out of their.
The thing is that both Iran and Turkey were moving in the direction of taking Islam less seriously, right? Mm-hmm. I do think that we don't know that maybe the Ataturk and Reza Shah, if maybe without that reaction, right now we would be in a better place. because they were already even
Yeah, but
before
that's a counterfactual.
even
Meaning,
before
how did you know?
Ataturk. Because no, we were saying the trends in Turkey before before
It's
Ataturk.
not just Turkey. If you look at it, it's pretty much most of the Muslim world was slowly moving away
Yeah.
from Islam. I mean, you can look at it, you can look at Egypt. You can look at even Saudi Arabia wasn't as conservative and radical as it is today before 1979, which was both
that one
the
particular.
it was that year that changed
1979,
everything.
yeah. It was because of Iran.
It was the Arab Revolution, and because also in Saudi Arabia there was the invasion of the Holy Mosque, which in a way paved the
Wahhabi.
yeah, but gave Wahhabis a lot more power because Saudi Arabia was so afraid. Because even though Saudi Arabia was not necessarily an open society or liberal by any sense, it didn't follow the rule of Islam to the T. So Jayman, who was the person that orchestrated the whole invasion, thought, he had to take things into his own hands and went and invaded the Holy Mosque. And because of that, they gave more legitimacy to the Wahhabis in the country.
I mean, even in Iran, before the revolution, nobody would assume that Islam would ever have. Islam was becoming something so minor, something that it's just a cultural thing. Some people have it, some people don't. Nobody would have guessed that there would be such a big comeback in Islam like it had, and I don't think it would have had if it wasn't a reaction to some. And imagine the amount of cost, because the revolution in Iran wasn't just bringing Iran back to a more Islamic state. It brought the entire region. As Ghada said, Saudi Arabia's reaction to the 1979 revolution in Iran was to stop making. Saudi Arabia was slowly making everything secular. And then they saw the revolution in Iran. They're like, okay, we need to take our Wahhabi community seriously so that we don't have an uprising here. And Saudi Arabia stopped the process, and they became very extreme. And not only they did that, Iran started making Lebanon, making Hezbollah in Lebanon, and in reaction to that, Saudi Arabia started sending Wahhabi ideology to Pakistan. The whole region Islam was becoming a minor ideology, and this basically brought it back into the center.
Well, in Pakistan, it wasn't forced secularization, but there was. I mean, the founder of Pakistan.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying Pakistan became more Islamic as a reaction to the 1979 Iran revolution, because Saudis were now spreading Wahhabism in Pakistan as a reaction of Iran spreading Shia Islam into the Middle East. Right. So it's a reaction to.
Yeah.
Right.
Speaking of Pakistan, so I have a couple of observations there. You guys have heard of Majid Nawaz. And we have several reformers like Majid Nawaz who are self-proclaimed Muslims, but they're trying to reform Islam from within. And in Pakistan, we have this guy, his name is Khamidi, who was a Muslim scholar who was exiled. So my question to the panel is, you can find these people in any country. There are people who are Muslim scholars trying to reform. They go into exile just because they cannot survive there. What do you think is the fate of these people, and is there a chance that Islam can ever become secular?
No.
I wouldn't say Islam becoming secular, but the people themselves, if they, just like Armin was saying, if you change the attitudes towards secularism and liberal values and whatnot, then those countries, based on the people that live in them, can become secular. And then Islam can be pushed towards more of the private sphere than, government.
Well, this is going back to, I think, what has been our, by we, I mean, I'm assuming you all agree that in order to move towards any kind of lasting liberalism, any kind of lasting modernity, you have to let go of the faith, and in order to do that, you have to address the problems within directly. You have to directly address where it does not reflect material reality of what we know about the natural world. You have to address the contradictions within the faith directly. You have to address the many ways that the many ways that it harms Muslims in a very honest way, and that's not being done. And too many Muslim reformers, again, I think the way I said in the introduction, they look inwards into the faith to try and find justification out of a tradition based on the faith. But it's sort of a circular argument, and you start off on a disadvantaged level, because religious fundamentalists, people who are conservatives or literalists, they always have this over you. They can always say that, well, the literal text says this, and it may be the case that you can move around the text, however, be playful with how you interpret things. But when the Quran says, well, husband is allowed to punish his wife or discipline his wife in such and such a way, liberalists and feminists already start off behind, because you're first having to argue, well, why doesn't a husband have a right to discipline his wife, and where do you argue that from? What do you cite as the morals and values that we should be headed towards? The argument from the religious side will always be, God knows best, and he has already told us what our moral values should be. So I think that this is something that is needlessly difficult. We're needlessly starting on backpedaling when we talk about religion as a way to justify liberal values, a way to secularism or anything like that.
This whole idea of reform is such a destructive thing, because as you see, religion always takes a back seat when it has to, but it's always ready to come back as soon as you give it the opportunity. This whole reform and we were always like this, it's just basically a cover so that it doesn't get completely destroyed while it's waiting in the cover. And it's a dangerous cover. It has to be exposed for what it is. No other book that tells you that it doesn't tell you that you could beat your wife. It doesn't tell you that you should beat your wife when she is disobedient. It tells you that you should beat your wife if you fear disobedience. Not even if she's disobedient. Fear disobedience. No, if a book that tells you that how you should treat your slaves, that you could rape other men's wives if you capture them in war, that us three here deserve to be burned forever and tortured. We deserve that because we disagree with Muslims.
Death in this life. Capital punishment.
Yeah. No other book that suggests these things. People say well, let's not throw all of that out. Maybe we could just reform it a little bit. No other book that says any of these things. People will say, throw this book in the garbage. Why are we even talking about this? Who is taking this seriously? Reform this book. It's always going to be there. These verses are always going to be there. Every time Islam acted secular or moderate or peaceful, it was because it was forced to do so. That was not reform. It's reform only if there's something within the text that makes it. There's nothing within these texts that makes it behave like that. It's always other ideas, other competing ideas. When Muslims become secular, it's not because Islam made them secular, it's because they are taking Islam less seriously.
Yeah. I think one way, for me, if there is a type of reform that can potentially work, it has to be one that is willing to be honest about the faults in the faith and willing to say so and say that I actually depart from the Quran in this instance. There's something that I hear occasionally from my liberal Christian friends or people that I've known when they'll say something like, okay, well, I'll ask, do you support gay marriage? If so, how does this work with your faith? And they'll say something like, I'm a Christian, but, and then the but will be the way that they depart from the faith. But I think that it's wrong to do this. What they are saying is that I am a Christian, sure, and in some sort of a symbolic sense, but in this particular way, I acknowledge that there is something higher, that human beings may have discovered a value or a goal or a way of managing our affairs that is superior to God's way. And I think it's that I'm a Christian, but that if Muslims can adopt a similar way of thinking, then I would feel differently about reform. Except that's not how reform conversations are happening right at this moment. Largely, I've seen from Muslim progressive groups, Islam is actually totally liberal, and everyone who is interpreting it in any other way is bastardizing the language, and they're all wrong, and we'll argue scripturally about why they're wrong. And I think that's the wrong way to go. The way you got to do is say, well, maybe it does say that, and I think it does say that, but we have to, I won't choose this path, because here's this other line of thinking that is more correct to me, that rings more true to me, and in fact, not everything that I believe and not everything that I choose to do should be run by this book alone.
And to give credit to, okay, so even though these Muslims are reading these texts and are trying to come up with the most weirdest arguments, gymnastic ways to make it mean something else, it's because they themselves are good people. They are better than these books. They read the text that says, beat your wife if you fear that she's going to be disobedient, and they don't want this to mean that. They are desperately trying to make it mean something else because they are better than that. But that means that they're not getting these values that they have from that book. These values are coming from somewhere else. It has nothing to do with Islam.
Well, I'd like to add, I have 2 points to say. One about reform and one about how Muslims can secularize their societies. About reform, I don't really agree much with it, and for completely different reasons than both Armin and Sarah are saying. I have a huge problem with the character of the Prophet himself, the person that brought us Islam. To me, he's not exactly the best role model, and he really isn't. So I can't really see how the religion can be reformed if that person, Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, is still regarded as this perfect example of a human being. And then the other part of what I wanted to add was changing people's perspective. And I have nothing against people being Muslim. They can be Muslim all they want. They can just they build all their mosques and pray in their mosques and fast Ramadan and whatever it is that they want to do. Except that you can't really force it onto the masses. And just like in Iran and in Turkey, where they force secularism, in other parts of the world, they forced Islam. Saudi Arabia was one of them, where they really did force it onto the people, and it backfired, where a lot of people started questioning their religion because of that. I think there should be some kind of middle ground in there, and people that study, not necessarily look at the scripture and be like, yeah, let's change this word to mean tickle instead of hit, but more looking at it like maybe Islam isn't necessarily it has to be the state religion. Maybe we can separate it and put it on the side, because there's no actual scripture that actually says in that it has to be in your constitution. But it does mean that I have to be Muslim in myself, and I have to follow the religion thoroughly. But that doesn't mean that I have to force it onto somebody else.
One good example of where just in a sense, laws that are forced onto people can backfire is the example of Muslim communities in Western countries. Many of them are more liberal than they would be back home. American Muslims are an example of this. However, there are Western countries where the Muslim population is very prone to extremists. In Britain, for example, this was a couple of years ago, there was a study that found that there were more British Muslims who had joined the Islamic State than had joined the British military. I mean, that's a terrible, indictment on assimilation in that country. And I think assimilation there has to be a persuasive element to it, and that's what will make it lasting. Is that you can't just say, well, this is the country and these are our laws, follow them or else. I think in addition to, well, these are the laws, but here's why they're important. Here's why we value them. Here's why they mean a lot to us and why they have gotten us to such a wonderful place and why you should follow them too, and they will help you too. And this sort of buying into the whole contract of Western society will help Muslims assimilate here, and the ideas will continue to spread abroad.
I'm going to disagree with you a little bit. If that, I don't think it's very. I don't like going to Muslims and telling them, hey, maybe this book means that you shouldn't force this on us. I don't want to use this book.
No,
right?
no, no, they're not using the book. They're saying that there is nothing in that book.
I don't want to
make
it. I don't care if it's in this book or not. You know what I mean? I don't want to use this book as a point of argument. I mean,
but the way I look at it is that if you want to talk to somebody that is against you, you still have to use their language.
No, that's
not necessarily in like, let's reform the religion.
That's my point. I think Muslims are more than just Muslims.
Yeah.
And they get influenced. I'm not saying you're saying that, but I do think that Muslims do get influenced more if you use the best arguments. And the best arguments are not that, don't do this because this is not in this book. The best arguments is actually the real reason for why they shouldn't be doing that. And I give them credit that I don't think that, I do give them enough credit to think it will work if you actually give them good reason. I know we have heard many religious fundamentalists, even Muslims that wanted to join ISIS, that said that they gave up on fundamentalist Islam, not because they read the Quran or they listened to a reformist Muslim, but because they watched Carl Sagan or Richard Dawkins videos, right? It wasn't Islam that made them change their mind. It was a better competing idea, and it's more honest, and it works. It works better. I have, these reformist Muslims or secular Muslims or whatever, their audience is not Muslims when they come and tell you Islam is this, Islam is secular. Their audience is non-Muslims. Mm-hmm. They're selling Islam to non-Muslims, and they're not changing anyone's minds in their own ummah, right?
All right, I have one more question for the panel. After that, we'll open up the conversation for the audience. And if I could have 2 volunteers ready with mics along each aisle, I would appreciate it. And just wait for me to point out who to take the mic to. Anyway, my question is you brought up liberal values and liberalism. We hear this argument a lot. A lot of people claim that Islam is a liberal religion, and they argue that Muhammad was the first feminist. He freed the slaves and all of that. What do you guys think about the Islamic law? Are there any parts of Islamic law that are compatible with the liberal values?
I, for one, completely disagree. There is nothing in the Islamic law, like for example, just look at family law. A woman in order to get married has to have permission from her father or some kind of legal guardian. If this is her first marriage, can't divorce unless the husband divorces her. Does not have custody of her kids after the age of 7. Adultery is punishable. If they're not married, then the adultery is punished by lashes. If they're married, by stoning. How is that liberal? How is that anywhere near what we want a civil society to have?
Even if Islamic laws were not as bad as we always hear they are, the fact that they are based on claims that haven't been proven ever already makes it very likely that you're not going to get good results from it. If I make my decisions every day based on the fact that I believe that there's a monster living in my closet, I'm going to make bad decisions, right? Even if it's a peaceful monster and it's like kind and I'm still gonna maybe leave half of my food for it. I don't know. I'm gonna do some crazy shit. I'm making decisions based on bullshit, even if it's peaceful bullshit. It's something that hasn't been proven, and we're making legal laws and policies and big economic decisions based on this. It's not true. So you're already building something on something that you haven't even demonstrated why we should build it on.
I just want to clarify, not really add to that point, but you said that people say that Muhammad freed the slaves. which is just a point that just gets to me because it's so aggravating to hear, because he did not free all the slaves. What he did do was say, no Muslim can enslave another Muslim. This did not mean that you can't enslave people, just you can't enslave Muslims. Also, it's an active thing. So if you're a Muslim, like if you're a slave and then you convert to Islam, you're still a slave. You're not free because you've converted. You can't actively enslave Muslims. That's what it said. And when you look at the effects of what this policy could have been, you can argue, I think very persuasively, that this spread slavery from Arabia and its just neighboring territories out into Africa, out into India, out across the world, because you can't, so long as Islam is spreading and people are becoming Muslims, you can't enslave them, but you still need slaves. So where are you going to get them? You're going to take ships out to Africa. You're going to go to, even Central Europe, and you're going to find your slaves there. So it's the slavery thing just that meme has to go.
Yeah, Muhammad himself had many slaves.
Sex slaves.
Sex slaves. So that makes no sense.
All right, we're going to open the floor for audience questions. So let's have the mic over here.
This may be a big piece. I haven't heard you say anything about this, but it's very important to what I'm looking at. How is the internet changing Pakistan, Saudi Arabia? You have contacts. You know what's going on better than any of us do. How is that changing? And it could be changing for the worse. Maybe they're getting better at Islam. I don't know.
But that's kind of a loaded question because the answer is not one answer. There are people that are changing their ideas and their perspectives about secularism. It's like, secularism does not mean that there is no more religion. I mean, I can still practice my religion and, have a secular country. So, my neighbor who is Christian or not a Muslim can also, be themselves and not be discriminated against. But then there's also the complete opposite of that. And unfortunately, from my perspective, it has been more the majority than it is the minority, where they define something like secularism, like, then my sister and my mother and my daughter are going to go out naked into the world, and that's what the Westerners want.
To answer your question about the internet and its effects, it's had effects on both ends, but I would say largely a positive one. Positive in the sense that there's more. I feel like there's more atheists in the world. There's more free thinkers. There's more people who doubt the faith.
There are more free thinkers, but the ones that are still Muslim and then they see the effects of secularization somewhere else around the world, they don't like it.
But a lot of that was visible just even without the internet. That's visible anyway. You have Hollywood and you see them, and then you go astaghfirullah, and then you say that this is a big that. One thing that isn't enough discussed is part of the hatred of America and of the West as a whole is due to moral differences, and a lot of it is due to the differences between how we treat sexes. And you can read the writings of Sayyid Qutb, who was the guy whose ideas spawned the Muslim Brotherhood and a variety of other, you can say Al-Qaeda and a variety of other organizations. He came to America, and this was in the 50s, where he came to America and he saw the way that Americans behaved. And this is in the 50s, and he was horrified. He was like, these people, it's just lust everywhere, and there's just so much sexual desire, and the women, they dress so seductively, and this was a big part of his disgust towards America and what he thought the danger he thought it posed. So I think you're right in the sense that any kind of media that opens up and really shows the West for what it is can horrify Muslims. But from an activist perspective, we know that it works in recruiting extremists, that the internet has a place there, because you don't have to go to a mosque, you don't have to talk to anybody, you can just find literature online and you can radicalize yourself. You don't need anyone else. But the opposite happens too, where there are Muslims who are, Googling something and they end up on an ex-Muslim video. They see it and then it changes their minds. And in fact, there are a lot of people who come to me and they've said that directly to me, like, I've seen one of your videos and that's when I decided that I was going to leave the faith. And I know for me personally, when the way that I left the faith was there were a lot of different reasons, but I remember most vividly an atheist friend of mine giving me these verses from the Quran. He just printed them out, and he was kind of smug about it and saying, look at this, like, how do you look at what this says, this is your faith, this is your religion. And I was so insulted, and I thought, you are distorting things, and this isn't what it actually, there's context, and there's something that will explain all this away. And then I had the internet right there. It was just at my fingertips. I could easily find out not just the Muslim side of things, but also, along came on Google a variety of different discussions about what certain verses meant, and I poked around and I read, and I discovered that the side that was criticizing those verses had more strength to it and more legitimacy in my eyes, and that was part of me leaving the faith. So I think there's a lot to it that says that the internet helps ex-Muslim communities in particular come together. When it comes to ex-Muslims in North America, my organization, without the internet, we could not have existed. There's no way we would have been able to organize a way that we've been able to organize. What we do now is we find people, we send out calls all across the internet forums relating to atheists and free thought and that kind of thing. And we encourage ex-Muslims to join our communities. And when they join enough in a local area, we then start a community. But they have to find us first. And the way that they find us is the internet, because they can do it privately. They can do it without telling their parents about their doubts or anything like that. And this allows us just this really powerful mechanism for reaching people that we just could not have in any other way.
And just one final thing to answer your question is also the internet also helped a lot of Muslims in the Muslim countries understand what secularism actually is. It's not, it's not necessarily liberal values or feminism or, I'm not saying any of those things are bad, but in Muslim contexts, it is. So they start to learn more about what it really is, and their attitudes towards it also change.
Right. One thing, just to get some ideas how much people there want this kind of content is on the Atheist Republic Facebook page. When I go look at the insights, we right now have about 1,900,000 followers, and I think the second country from the top is Pakistan, a number of followers of the country. And like the Secular Jihadist podcast, one of the top countries that it gets downloaded in is in Egypt, and Saudi Arabia also gets thousands of downloads every week. So, and these are in English. Imagine if we managed to translate these in Arabic, Urdu, Indonesian, then how much more people would be able to have access to it, right? And this is very important because there's a lot of demand for this type of content over there, and they can't get it they can't make it over there, so they really rely us over here to provide them the content. And this worries me because these are very small free speech areas that we're using to give these people the content and the voice that they need, and laws currently changing. Sometimes I'm scared that this whole PC culture, making it influence all of a sudden on laws. I mean, in Canada, we had the M103, the Islamophobia, now made its way into the legal documents. It wasn't a law yet, but it could be. Yeah, it was a motion. In the UK, people are getting arrested for being offensive. And these laws is not just going to, the influence of it is not just going to be limited to the UK or Canada, because Atheist Republic is a Canadian company. Secular Jihadist is a Canadian company. It's gonna, if we can't use these free speech hubs to be able to provide content to these other countries, where else would people be able to do this from?
Let's take another question.
First of all, I want to say your voices are beautiful, and keep doing what you're doing. We need more people like you, so thank you. I'm part of the team on recovering from religion, and more we're seeing more people reaching out to us through the chat line from Muslim countries, Islamic states. And we're seeing more and more people that are fearful for their lives because they no longer believe. And you guys, we send a lot of them to your resources and things. My question is, what can we do more for these people that are reaching out to us so we can better help them?
What do they want somebody to talk to, or do they want to get out? It depends on what they're asking for.
A lot of them want to come out, but first of all, I mean, we tell them your safety is number one. We had a boy 2 days ago he was a Syrian refugee living in Egypt and fearful for his life, that he no longer believes.
I think one thing I'm doing, we made a blog post on Atheist Republic with all the information of, because we got so many messages like that, so we just put all the information in one blog post on how you get. It's not easy it's really not easy, but we just try to make them put all the links and resources in one page. Another thing is, another place I send them to, CFI has a new program,
Secular Rescue.
Secular Rescue. So I send them there as well. I also know some contacts in we don't have the experience. I tried it one time, and it was Rana, and it's really difficult to help these people. And you have to have a lot of experience and know what you're doing. And you don't know if which one of them are real, which one of them are not. And you might actually get in legal trouble. You might have the government tell
you might get them in trouble.
Yeah.
You might get them into a worse situation than they started off in.
Right.
We've done some of these things a few times. Most recently, we got a member of Ex-Muslims of North America, Somali kid from America, and his parents, they said, well, let's go on a vacation to Kenya. And they went on the vacation, and surprise, it's not a vacation. You're going to be in a camp, and you're going to learn what the beauty of your faith, and we're going to bring you back to Islam. He was able to contact us because he was already connected to our communities, because he was already screened and already a part of, his local chapter. That he was able to contact somebody that night, and we got him out the next day. But this was just such a difficult endeavor from a resources perspective. You have to have several people on board that are working with any one particular case. In this case, we knew him very well. We knew the other people very well. We got this. We worked with the embassy there, and we happened to have people find people that were sympathetic and helped us. We knew local Kenyan atheists there who were undercover, who snuck in themselves to sneak him out of where he was to safely to the embassy. We had the resources to fund his flight and take care of his lodging until he was safe. But you simply can't do that as often as you need to be able to do that.
Right.
And you usually don't know enough about the people that you're helping that we did know because he was American. And these rescue missions, there have been stories, I won't repeat them, where we don't know how it ended, and it seemed like maybe it ended badly, where the escape attempt ended up, got them into a worse situation, and we don't know where they are, and we don't know what happened to them. So they are fraught with risk when you're looking at actual escape attempts. So it's up to the individual as to whether you want to work on this directly.
I suggest finding out somebody that does this and knows what they're doing, and just
Nobody really does this, though.
Well, I mean, I'll give you some people know better than others.
Some people know better than others, but I think there's no group right now that is really equipped to handle this, because the people that they're running from are their parents, are their family members. They know all about them, and they know how to get them back. And an easy way to get your child to return back to you is to emotionally manipulate it and say, we're sorry, we didn't mean it, please come back. And we've had many members who that's exactly what happened to them, where somebody said, we're sorry, we didn't mean it. They went back because they love their parents and they can't help it, and then got into a worse situation.
Just to let you know how much experience matters, like just this morning a girl from Bangladesh contacted me. And she has pictures, she's an atheist, and she has pictures to show that she's being beaten up. So that proof goes a long way. And I didn't know what to do with it, so I contacted the human rights organization, and they asked me a lot of questions to ask her, and those are very, very good questions to see how they can help her. I would not have come up with those questions. They wanted to, so that's why I know, and nobody knows exactly what to do, but there are some people that have dealt with a lot of cases.
Some people know more than others. My fear is more that that if we focus our resources too much on helping individual cases, then we can't make a broader change, because we need to solve the problem. We can't be pulling out one individual at a time. It's not even a tourniquet. It's not even stemming the flow. It's just a Band-Aid on like a mortal wound. So we need to make change on a broader level. And if we have some resources, that's where we need to pull them. Right.
Okay, I have a slightly unfavorable opinion about this. So not everybody is equipped to leave their home country and live in the West. Not necessarily because they don't have the necessary, ideologies that align with it, but also because a lot of these people have been growing up dependent completely on their families. They don't know how to live on their own, and then they come here and they're expected. You're pretty much like throwing them into the world and be like, "Hey, live." We can't just do that. And the thing is, if you want to leave, it has to come from you. I mean, in my case, my family wasn't necessarily abusive in the sense that they were hitting me and they were beating me, but they were very indoctrinated, and they wanted me to follow their religion to the T, and I didn't want to. And it took years and years and years until I finally was able to come up with the necessary means to leave the country. And what I would say to people in this situation is find a community for yourself in the country, in the city, in the town that you are in. And the internet, as I just said, is a really wonderful place for you to find these people. And when I was back in Saudi and I was trying to maneuver the underground life of an ex-Muslim, the internet was where I went in order to find like-minded people, not necessarily meet them in real life, even though I had. And I was lucky that none of them were actually Muslims trying to be undercover. But it's still better than living in fear for your life.
One thing we can do just from an organizational perspective, more than help individuals, I think, is work with local groups, find local groups in any country. And that's how we were able to, for the example of the Somali American who was part of our group, so we got out of Kenya. We got him out of Kenya because we knew people there. We knew people on the ground. What can we do to help, atheists and secularists in those countries who are trying to make change within their countries? What can we provide them? Can we provide them resources? Can we provide them legal help? Can we provide them, some sort of resources in another form? If that's what we can do, if we can push our governments in one direction, then that's one way we can help them too. But I think we should be looking at it from that angle and trying to make a change it just in a more broad sense.
Yeah, it's just hard when somebody sends you a message like that.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking.
Other questions?
Hi, my name is Uzair. I'm from Pakistan. And I just came to the US 3 years ago, and a lot of things that you guys are talking about.
Can you speak louder?
Yeah, my name is Uzair. I'm from Pakistan, and I just came to the US 3 years ago. And a lot of things that you are saying are very relatable, and it's definitely very suffocating over there. When you're living over there in such a condition. I wanted to ask you, so initially you said that essentially there are 4 forms of secular government, and the ones that you guys are wanting to aim for is essentially the second and the third, which is not very extreme, but gives religion some space. So the way, from what I understand, essentially is the way from what you guys are talking about, Islam and secularism cannot really coexist with each other. So if you have a secular government and if you have, let's say, some Muslims who want to practice Islam in that society, how would the secular government sort of allow that without trying to put limitations on what people want to do? And in that case, is any other religion, can any religion coexist with secularism?
They can coexist. I didn't say they can't coexist. It's just that Islam would not like its position under a secular government because Islam wants to dominate and it can't. And secularism is anti-Islam in a way that it forces it in a position that it has no role in governance, right? Not that in fact, based on the definition of secularism, Muslims should have the right to practice their religion as long as it doesn't violate secular laws, right? So it doesn't say, it's not, in fact, it's within the very definition of secularism that they are able to coexist with the rest of the community. No. Basically, you can't come to make laws based on magic.
No, but there's a difference there. I disagree, because there are some religions are more emphasize more directly that the religion and the faithful have to get involved in politics than others. Right. And there is a distinction there, and you can make that. I wouldn't, because I'm not that knowledgeable about Christianity, but I would say that about Christianity in a vague sense, that it is more compatible with secularism than Islam is ultimately compatible with secularism, because there's more explicit verses in scriptures that make Islam a political faith in a way that Christianity is, but it isn't to that extent.
Yep, but my point was not that. Obviously, Islam is way more political ideology than Christianity. But my point is, from a secular perspective, none of these fantasies get to have a say in public policy. That's the position. Some of them are more eager, some of them are less eager, some of them don't give a shit. Doesn't matter. You all go play your fantasy games over there and let the adults make public policy decisions for the rest of us.
The example that comes to my mind is from France, where sort of the government banned hijab. And essentially, like, if you're saying that religion can sort of be outside the government but still exist, then I think they will always clash, because a secular government would not allow practices which are very conservative in that sense.
Right. So there are clashes with faith and then secular laws. I think we would say that when that clash happens, the side that has to accommodate the other is the religion has to accommodate secular law more often than not. In the case of the hijab, I'm really interested in the banning of the face veil, not all hijab, but of the way that it's been playing out in France and then in Montreal, Quebec, in Canada. So it's really interesting to me, because I'm very much religious liberty kind of a secularist, in the sense that, yes, I find a lot of religious practices and traditions disgusting and immoral, but I also strongly believe that I don't have a right to tell other people what is or isn't disgusting and immoral, at least when it comes to certain matters of faith and belief. So when it comes to the face veil, I think there was how many years ago was the burkini banned, like in that French town? There was an attempt to ban this Muslim swimsuit called the burkini, and it's essentially it's like a wetsuit, but it's like loose. So it's very just as difficult and cumbersome, but it's better than not being able to go to the beach. So Muslim women were wearing it, and there was this French town or village that decided that they didn't want any of that on their beaches, and this caused a big controversy in France, whether or not the state should have a role in banning something like this. And the arguments for banning it were that this is a very clear display of sexism and misogyny, and we should take an active role in promulgating these values towards other citizens. And in my opinion, it was extremely wrong-headed to try and ban something like that, and it's worth a lot of trouble in the media, it's not worth the trouble in the media. And then when it comes to actually changing the minds of the believers, it not only will it not change those minds, I think it would actively convince some Muslims who are of the contrarian bent to take up practices like the hijab in the cause of freedom. And I know that I would have done that when I was Muslim. I know that if somebody told me, as a young Muslim woman that you can't wear this, I would want to wear it. Immediately I would be like, I'm going to wear this. And it was this contrarian bent that kind of led me out of the faith eventually. But if America had also been pushing me in that direction in the same way that Islam was, I don't know how I would have behaved. I feel like I would have started to think of the hijab as a political symbol, as a this is me practicing political dissent and taking down the man because they can't tell me how to dress.
Religion feeds on being the victim.
Right. Yeah. And so you don't want to give them that on the one hand, you don't want to give them that. On the other, there are also in practical terms, if you want to give Muslim women freedom, banning the face veil is not the way to do it. And the reason that it is not the way to do it is that there are many women in the West who are living in extremely restrictive households. They are not allowed to leave their home except under certain conditions, except unless they are dressed a specific way. And for those women, those are the most vulnerable women, the women who absolutely need as much of our help as they can get and savor their little bursts of freedom. When you say you can't wear a burqi to the beach, for some of those women, what you're saying is now it means you can't go to the beach because your husband or your father or whoever it is will not let you go to the beach. So that is another freedom that you had before that you no longer have. So in that practical terms too, I think it is counterproductive.
Was that the last question? I really need to nature. Right. You guys handle this next one. Yeah.
I just had a real quick question about coming back to the point of how much Islam can be reformed. And two things that I think might be important there are that Islam claims to be the final and the total revelation from God. And so I think that decreases avenues for change. And also, what was the second part? I forgot the second part. But what are your guys' thoughts on that claim made by Islam, that it's the final and the total revelation?
Yeah, it's just another thing that makes Islam more difficult to reform. It's another thing that makes it more, less willing to bend. Another way to look at it, though, when we look at something like the claim that this is the final revelation and this is the perfect word of God, is that can be viewed as a strength in a lot of ways, but it's also a weakness. It's a weakness in the sense that one little contradiction, one little problem with the logic in the faith is enough to break a lot of people out. And I hear this from people who were raised in very conservative Christian or other faiths in a very literal sense, and they had a similar feeling where you just find that one kernel that doesn't make any sense, and the whole thing sort of falls to pieces because it was taken to be so literally perfect. And in Islam, the vast majority of Muslims look at their faith as literally perfect, which makes it more. I think if it won't bend, that means that it makes it easier to break. And in the case of the growing atheism in the Muslim world, where now we have some evidence. It's hard to get a lot of evidence on what's going on because people don't want to talk about being openly non-religious or openly having left the faith. Nobody wants to talk about it, so statistics are difficult, but we're starting to gain some understanding. I remember there's a poll a while ago that said that 5% of Saudi Arabians that they looked at said that they were atheists. 5% in Saudi Arabia. That's a high number for Saudi Arabia. And I can only see this growing, this percentage of people who are not loud at all, they don't speak at all, who are leaving the faith, some of whom are starting to speak out. And I've seen a growth in ex-Muslims, an exponential growth, in fact, in ex-Muslims and ex-Muslim activists and ex-Muslim now, this organizations like mine that are cropping up, and we at XMNA are trying to foster these organizations abroad as well. But I think, in some senses, from a free-thinking perspective, in the long run, it could be beneficial that Islam views itself as such a perfect religion, that Muhammad's example is so perfect. Because when evidence, you don't need that much evidence against it for it to be enough for someone to say that this is not something that I can believe in at all.
What was the question?
that Islam is, what are our thoughts on the fact that sees itself as the perfect faith, and that Muhammad is a seal of the prophets and it's the final revelation?
Right. Well, I mean, it makes it such an easy target because all you need is one mistake.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Yeah. Did you mention reform though?
Yeah, it's kind of.
He said when we're looking at reform and when we're discussing reform. So this is why I think leaving the faith behind is easier, I think, arguably in Islam than it is in other faiths, because of how difficult, because of how non-flexible the faith and its traditions are. That makes it easier for people to say, well, I mean, I only have so much room I can play with, and obviously this doesn't make sense. So I think from the reform question, I would bet on us. I would bet on ex-Muslims. I would bet on atheists.
Yeah. Stop replacing bullshit with a more peaceful kind of bullshit. Just kidding. Yeah. Basically, I really don't understand this fascination of the some atheists with the reform movement. When did the atheist movement become selling religion to people just because it's a better religion? Is that what we're doing?
It sounds like it will work, because it seems like it. It seems like it's more practical than what we're saying, and it's
not. Yeah.
It's not. I think actually it's not, and it's not honest, and I don't think we should pursue it because it's not honest. But in addition, people seem to think it's pragmatic.
It's saying like, I'm smart enough to know God is bullshit, but you people seem too dumb. I'm just gonna hope that this crazy religion that you have, I'm just gonna try to replace it with a less threatening religion so I can feel a little bit more safe, because you guys are not ready to see that this is all bullshit yet.
Let's take another question.
Hello.
Yes.
Okay. I'm Abdul. I'm from Saudi Arabia. I first thank you all for coming. I especially thank Armin and Sarah for your websites. They really helped me a lot when I made the shift. I have two questions. First, don't you think that it's unfair to judge Islam as either being political or apolitical, and for that matter also Christianity? I say this because I believe Islam and Christianity are just texts. They cannot wake up and convince people. It's the people's interpretations of them that render them either political or not. So and also I agree with you that a true and honest reading and literal reading of the Quran will not be secular. I agree with you on that. But so on the same way, when we look at Christianity, the Bible itself did not change. The text of the Bible did not change just after the Enlightenment. It was the same Bible that it was there during the Crusades.
Can you speak louder?
The text of the Bible did not change after the Enlightenment, even though secularism came after the Enlightenment. So I'm saying that the Bible, the text of the Bible that was there when the Crusades were launched, it's the same text that we have now. But the difference is not the text itself, but it's the interpretations of the people. So I'm saying, I'm saying that the text itself cannot be.
So what if I give you a book that was, the title of the book was Politics 101? Do you think that text could be political? Wouldn't that text be political? If books...
Well, I think what he's saying is that it's unfair to say that it's inherently anything.
Unless it says itself. Like, just because it's only text doesn't mean it can't be political. I give you an example. What if I give you a book that was titled Politics 101? Could I say it's unfair for you to say that the text could be political?
Right, but we are smarter than Prophet Muhammad, right? We are more humane than he was.
Yeah, you're talking about Muslims versus Islam. Islam, as the text itself, could be political, even if people don't follow it, right? If the text talks about politics and how to do politics, then it's a political text.
Yeah, but we are smart enough to ignore the political side.
Yeah, Muslims are smarter than Islam. I agree.
So the second question is for Ghada. I would like to know your take about the ongoing changes in Saudi Arabia. Do you think, say, 10 years from now, the situation there will be more tolerant towards, say, the other, especially women? What do you think?
I'm not going to go so far as to say 10 years from now. I'm going to just talk about, this is completely my experience, and it's not the experience of other Saudis, for example. I've noticed that the younger generation, generations that are even younger than I am in Saudi Arabia, are much more tolerant and much more open about people that are different than them, that are not necessarily the ones that are, like outspoken atheists, but they know, like, oh, this person doesn't really practice religion, this person has more progressive ideologies and views on things, and they're more for women's empowerment and for all of that. And it seems it's not necessarily the changes that the monarchy is putting together, but it's because, as discussed before, they have more access to social media and the internet. A lot of Saudis like you and I come to the US, come to different parts of the world, and we study and we go back. And just not necessarily like the values that we learned here, but just opening up our eyes and knowing that there are other people out there that are also good, that are different than us, and it just doesn't sit well with you that they should be treated differently, or that your sister or your mother or the women that are in your country should be treated differently. So maybe I see it now that these changes are happening between just the people look at these things differently. And a little bit when I was working there, slowly, just within the few years that I was working, that the men started looking at us differently as women working with them in the workplace. And I see it's probably even better now because it's been a few years since I've been there, and it's probably going to get even better as we go by, because it's not just the changes that the monarchy is putting in together, but because people themselves are being more educated, and they're looking and they're reading and they're traveling and they're seeing all of these changes and things, and they go back home and they're thinking, yeah, my sister, my mother, my atheist friend, they all deserve the same thing.
I'm so glad that you're giving the credit to the people, because Ben Salman himself is a fucking monster. This guy is... People are congratulating him for letting women drive, and then how many people are talking about the fact that he's bombing innocent people in Yemen, and oh, women can drive, yes, great. Can you stop killing children as well at the same time? Like, this guy deserves no the amount of misery and suffering this guy has caused. He has to cure cancer for him to even come close to even. We are experiencing the greatest humanitarian crisis of our time, and the whole world is silent. Not only they're silent, they're helping Saudi Arabia. The United States is violating its own constitution, selling weapons to Saudi Arabia, knowing what they're being used for. The United States is fueling Saudi planes, knowing in midair while they go and bomb children, and they come back and they get fueled again by U.S. planes. Iran is also to be blamed, right? Iran is loving this, because they are making Saudi Arabia waste billions of dollars in a war that was supposed to win in 2 months, but they are so arrogant that they rather keep killing children rather than admit defeat, rather than admit that with all the billions of dollars that they spent on their weaponry, they can't defeat a bunch of desert dwelling people. They know how to play the media, because people are more interested in, like, oh, women could go into stadium now, women can drive now women can go into the military now. But he's not only
certain positions.
But these get media attention. But killing, okay, you're pro-woman. What about women in Yemen? And this guy is having the most aggressive political, all the everybody that is against him is getting arrested. Like, this is unprecedented even for Saudi Arabia. The number of people that he actually, the number of political prisoners have increased under this guy. Even in Saudi Arabia, life has not become better. People are like, oh, well, that's whataboutism, because why can't you just focus on the good as well, like say positive things about the good and also condemn the bad? It's not whataboutism if you're talking about the same guy. Whataboutism is if I distract you with something else when somebody is doing it. This is the same guy. And it's not whataboutism is if the so-called reforms that he's doing is intended to distract people from the crimes that he's committing.
All right, we have a short amount of time left. Let's actually move over there, and we'll come back there later. Let's move the mic over there to the middle. Jacob, can we have the mic?
Actually wanted to touch that question.
Oh, Sarah wanted to say something about that.
how much time do we have?
You can answer.
Yeah, because I wanted to touch it because I thought that at least how interpreted what you were saying was interesting, and I think that it deserves to be covered. The texts, the literal texts do matter. You're right to say that the Bible has moved away, or not the Bible, the Christianity and Christians have moved away, have become something different, and Christianity has become something different despite the Bible being the same as it was. And I just want to reiterate that texts do matter. The Bible is still the same. Christians have changed. Christians have become less literal. Christians have began to put aside the faith too. There's many Christians who are just Christians in name only. They don't read the Bible. They don't know anything about it. And then there's many who are opting out of faith altogether. And that has been slowly happening for a long time. One way that perhaps you can look at it when we're discussing a religion is the text as a starting off point. So from there, if you're going to be literal, well, then the text matters a lot. And if you're going to be metaphorical, if you're willing to play games and get it to wherever you want it to be, well, then it's still the starting off point, but it still matters where it was. The text still matters even in that instinct. It still limits you to the extent that where you are coming from, you may have farther to go, to more cartwheels to do, more, playing around with the language to get to that different point. So when you're playing around with the text, what matters is, where it is that you're starting off from, in this case, the Quran or the Bible, and then when it is that you began the process of moving it to where you wanted it to go from a metaphorical perspective. And Christians have been doing this for a really long time. And they never did it with, as far as I know, that's a broad generalization, but I think generally speaking, they didn't know they were walking away from God when they were embracing, when they were embracing humanism. The first humanists were Christians or thought of themselves as Christian, but they were walking away from the faith. They were discovering science, and technologies that were going to move them away from the faith, but they didn't know as they were headed there. And these things happened slowly. Within a generation, I can make a change. And then the next generation will forget that was even a change that I made. But the changes that are happening in Islam are happening very quickly. And Islam is having to confront the modern world as it stands very quickly. But the Christianity never had to do that. Christianity, the liberalism and modern, what we call liberalism, was just getting its feet and evolving alongside Christianity. So Christianity just had to give up a little bit here, a little bit there, so on and so forth, over the course of centuries. So that I don't know if Christians understand, the average Christian understands how far away they are from the Bible. But that hasn't happened in Islam, and that hasn't happened with the Quran. And Muslims are much closer to their text. And so now they're confronting, here it is, 21st century, modernity. And they can see starkly how it is not religious.
All right, next question.
Okay, so I read a lot of things recently from ex-Muslim people and organizations kind of criticizing particularly American kind of leftist attitudes in the sense that they won't criticize Islam or Muslims, even though there are all these things that seem to go against secular liberal American values, because they don't want to be seen as oppressing Muslims or being discriminatory against Muslims or Islam. And the hijab being a good example, where I read some things recently about women who came from backgrounds where they've been forced to wear hijab being kind of disturbed, seeing that in the West it's almost being sort of romanticized and included in a way that they felt was a little bit disturbing. And so I'm just wondering if you think that there's a way that people in the West can be able to criticize Islam in a way they don't get demonized by their own kind of leftist groups, or if, reform, or you talked about not liking the word reform, or change for Islam should just come from within, and people who weren't from Muslim backgrounds should just kind of back off and let it happen.
No, you don't need to be an ex-Muslim to be able to tell Islam is bullshit. It's so obviously bullshit that you don't need to be like, oh, I don't have experience. It's a claims without evidence. That's all you need to know, right? And that's all there is to it, okay? And if these people that don't want to be discriminatory against Muslims, they are being, because they think that Christians can handle criticism, but Muslims are too sensitive. So they think Muslims can't handle it. Muslims are apparently more sensitive.
I think the more voices that criticize any type of religion is good, whether it's somebody that has never probably heard of Islam, because and to be completely honest, anybody should be able to criticize a text or a religion or an ideology. It doesn't really matter where you're from, what you, if you have any kind of background with it. I mean, some Muslims tell us that as ex-Muslims don't deserve to be talking about Islam because we left it.
Right.
Just leave it behind you and just move on. Let Islam, us Muslims talk about Islam. But how on earth are you going to be looking at anything from a different perspective if you don't open up to the public? And when the more, and you said there's like, how can you open up the dialogue so the people from the left don't demonize you? I think the more people speak, the less likely others are going to call you names. I mean,
That's actually that's a very good point, because if you were an ex-Muslim, they're like, let non-ex-Muslims speak. You guys already left the religion, go live your life. But then if you are if you're not an ex-Muslim, like you don't know anything about Islam, so why are you even talking about it? But if you're worried about being called a bigot, just know that people in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, are risking their lives and dying for being able to say these things. So being called a bigot, maybe it's not that big of a deal compared to that.
Yeah, I can't say I have a solution for that, because I get called a bigot. I get called self-hating bigot pretty frequently, and that's a tough nut to crack. I mean, how do you prove that you don't hate yourself without sounding like an asshole? But
I don't think you really owe anybody anything, any explanation.
so-
This
I mean,
is
if you're
what
not
your
being called-
ideology is. This is what your opinion is. This is what you believe. You don't owe any, even people that ask us, like, why are you an ex-Muslim? Show me here in the text why. It's like, none of your freaking business. I left because I just don't believe in this.
If you're not being called names and being hated on, you're not really fighting for something worth
Well,
fighting for.
see, here's the truth. I mean, I think that's a really good point, that it's not as if the people that are fighting for the right thing in their time were lauded right then and there as champions of the good. In that time, you don't know where the world is going to go, and you don't know who's going to ultimately be something that we as a civilization understand as the right thing to do, as the progressive way forward. Everyone thinks, all advocates for any cause think that at that time they are the people that are fighting for justice and for what is right. So I think that one way is just to be patient and to see the seeds of your work sprout, hopefully. But I can't say that I have a solution to not being called that, to getting away with not being called that, because I do get called that. And I think there's something to be said about the inclination to just assume motives onto people who are criticizing Islam. And I get that pretty frequently. I'm sure anybody who's not from an ex-Muslim gets that quite often, is that what's the reason anyway that you're criticizing this? And the reason is that you are a racist or a bigot, and this is what you're using to justify your positions. And I think this assumption of motives thing is a broader problem in our culture than just in this instance. I see it all the time, where anytime anyone wants to discuss anything that could be mildly dangerous, in a political sense, there's an assumption of, oh, well, why are you talking about it anyway? So I think we have to think about how we're having these discussions and why we're having them. But I do want to point out that it's not that, what they will say is that there's no place for non-ex-Muslims to criticize or to talk about the faith. That you shouldn't be talking about it in any form. But it's not true that they feel that you can't take a position. They just feel that you can't take a negative position. Because you can say Islam is a religion of peace, and you can get away with that, and you will be just this wonderful champion. You can talk about how the hijab is feminist, and you can talk about how Sharia is progressive. Both of those two things I have heard. There was a CNN contributor that wrote a piece about Sharia, about progressive Sharia. In any case, you can do that. You can take a positive position if you'd like.
It's actually very good. The double standard is actually a very good point. They do the same thing with out of context verse, because whenever you tell them a negative verse, they're like, oh, what's the context, right? But if you ever give them a positive verse, they never tell you to, like, wait, maybe the context makes it different. They never ask you for context then.
All right, we have run out of time for audience questions. If you have more questions, we're going to be at a reception across the hall right after the talk. You can come talk to the speakers right there. you're welcome to join us for snacks and coffee and talk to them. I have one last question that I'll ask, and then we'll wrap this up. So we have seen, it's my personal observation, that in the atheist community, in the liberal progressive community, we have come a long way in accepting, say, atheist minorities, women. But there's one group that really is silenced so often, in my opinion, that is the ex-Muslims. And I think that's why what you do in your organization, Ex-Muslims of North America, or Secular Jihadists, or or Atheist Republic, is really valuable, because you're fighting an urge. It feels like a very strong urge in the liberal, progressive, and atheist community to shut down speech coming from ex-Muslims. Why do you think that is, and what can we do to change people's minds in the liberal and atheist communities?
Well, I kind of feel like it's changing. It's getting better. I mean, I'm noticing more podcasters are inviting ex-Muslims. More events are, like just the American Atheist Convention, they had ex-Muslim speaker. I think slowly, because of your work and other ex-Muslims going out there, what you are doing is making the change happen slowly. I think people were worried about being called bigots, but now you're normalizing it. We are normalizing it, and more people are feeling like hypocrites if they're not attacking Islam in the same way they're attacking Christianity or other religions.
I think, I hope it is getting better. I definitely see it getting better from the perspective of people from the Muslim world becoming more critical, and I'm seeing more ex-Muslims all the time. Am I seeing it necessarily getting better from the left? I don't think so. I think I'm seeing the opposite happen, in the sense that you see very publicly Muslims who are conservative, conservative Muslims who are, pushed towards the forefront of a variety of organizations, and their cause becomes the cause of everyone. And this whole, what I was saying, jokingly saying, but I actually have seen people saying that the hijab is a feminist symbol, that Sharia is progressive. I mean, these are recent. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, those conversations were not happening. People were not saying that the hijab was a wonderful feminist symbol back then. But they are saying it increasingly now. Now, 5 years ago, you wouldn't have said Sharia, there can be a progressive Sharia. You would never say that. But now there are some who are saying it. So I don't know if on the left it has necessarily gotten better. I think there are some people who have clung more deeply to where they were, and they have sort of, in my opinion, they have lost it in terms of principles. But I think that reflects on a broader problem in politics, that neither political side is expected to actually be principled and to really follow up on the principles that they say that they care about. So I think there's a bigger rot there that needs to be discussed, and when that can be taken care of, so will this be resolved. But at the moment, we seem to be aligning ourselves with groups simply because of, this is the politically convenient thing to do, this is the politically expedient thing to do, and that's all the thought that seems to be put into it. Unfortunately, I think this is why we have such a terrible political climate, and why we're seeing people like Trump.
Right. Well, to be fair, I think he was. You mentioned the left or the atheist community. So, well, I'm actually happy with the direction the atheist community is going. Maybe the left is a little bit more critical, but just to name.
Yeah, I would say the atheist community generally is getting a little bit better.
Yeah.
Since.
But not all. Like Seth Andrews, for example, from the left, he's from the very beginning. He was very welcoming to ex-Muslims, even before other people thought it was politically correct.
The only group on the left that has ever supported us has been atheists and secularists. That the only group that has shown any kind of charity to us and to what we're going has been atheists and freethinkers.
Another sign of progress. Just recently, an ex-Muslim, Imtiaz Shams, in London, was invited. I thought I put this challenge out. I never thought it would ever happen, but it happened in London. There was a Muslim event, and they invited an ex-Muslim speaker.
Wow.
Yeah, that was. They invited him to Australia, an ex-Muslim, to come to speak to the. So that's a good thing. I mean, to be fair, it was a very liberal Muslim community, but I'm hoping more Muslims will start inviting ex-Muslims to their mosques and have debates, have discussions. That would be. I mean, I don't really care that much about some people on the left because those are not the people that we need to convince that much. I think the Muslims should be our main target of convincing.
And I think what'll be convincing to the left at the moment, which I think is focused too much on political expediency, is if there's a significant number of people who are saying that, well, we don't buy this, and then suddenly it doesn't become that political of a thing to do. It's not that politically intelligent of a thing to do. There was a Pew poll that came out. I haven't taken too closely of a look at it, but recently about and it claimed that the same number of people that go into Islam leave Islam in the United States, and so I was looking at American Muslims, and the number of people that left Islam was about 23% of the people that they polled left Islam, and then 23%, about a similar amount converted in. Which seems like it's okay, we're at even, but I don't think so, because converts don't stay. There's no numbers on it, but this is anecdotally something that I know to be just a big problem with converts, and something that Muslims consider a problem within the convert population, because they go in with expecting certain things and then they find out that it's something else, and then leave 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. So I think generally speaking, what the Pew poll showed was that more people are leaving Islam, more Muslims are leaving Islam than are converting in or becoming a part of the faith. So those are all good numbers, and those make me happy. Another sort of validation that I've been getting increasingly lately is Muslims doing their best to try and counter what we're doing. In the past, we didn't exist as far as they were concerned. They would just deny our existence. They're liars. They're paid, shills. They were never Muslim to begin with. This is all an act.
Now they have courses on how to deal with us.
Yeah, exactly. So now they're getting it together. They're organizing because they see that this is a real problem, and that we need to handle it. There's conferences on what to do, of leaving faith and how to address this sort of crisis in faith among the young. There are, we had an event in George Washington University, I believe, where there was the word got around in the Muslim community that oh my God, there's ex-Muslims and they came and they were here and they said all these things, and then there was, this is what I heard, I don't know the truth of it, that there was an imam, a local imam, who said, well, he's going to dedicate his time now. He's going to dedicate his time to countering us. He's going to quit what he's doing because he has to take care of this. And of course, now I think, okay, if he's really going to look into it and what we're saying, then he'll be an atheist in 6 months. But
We're going to continue this conversation over coffee. We have to cut it off here since we've run out of time. Please help me thank our wonderful panelists, Sarah Haider, Armin, Navabi, and Ghada Ibrahim.